Hi, I'm Jody Larson, and I was moderator for the transportation section. Small group, but a lot of really great dialogue that came out of it. No solutions, but there's definite headway and a good identification of where some gaps are in the community. We talked about basically what are some of the current transportation modes that some of the homeless youth are using today, and I think some of those are probably fairly obvious where, biking, walking, bus is actually, the fare limits that to some degree, but that it still is a mode. Friends and people from some of these resources who are just giving rides just because they do. So from that we moved into some gaps in transportation, meaning location, meaning timing, things like that. Generally speaking, the time gaps seem to depend upon greatly the actual resource itself. For example, if it's school, then it's a 7 to 8-ish in the morning, 3 to 4. So those are some time gaps where there's rides that may be needed that don't exist. Or second shift, third shift. Bus lines don't really run super late, and so where do you go when you're done with Walmart at midnight? So the time is a little bit all over the place depending upon the resource. And the resource is something else that we also talked about, because in one of the deliverables that LGR will have from this forum is to communicate to the various transportation companies in Rochester what are some of the hurdles for homeless youth. And when I say homeless youth as it relates to transportation, I think that definitely can expand to say just homeless, because there are a lot of those same needs for adults as well as for youth. Even though our CIP was focused on youth, I think when you're talking transportation, you're also needing to capture a lot of people to justify taking a bus from one location to another. It's kind of more bang for the buck, if you will. So in looking at a little bit more of a broader view of homeless, the resource that came up in our discussion were anything related to healthcare. Salvation Army, Channel One, Zumbro Valley, Bethel Lutheran, Link, the county buildings, WDI, some of the schools, and I'm sure I missed a few in there, and maybe some that we haven't talked about. But some of these resources, as well as just the various friends' houses, those are the routes that we're looking at. And again, those resources based on time, maybe Channel One, I don't know what time they close, but obviously that route isn't needed after that time. So it does vary quite a bit. From that, that's part of the deliverable. Like I said, that will go to some of the transportation companies just to let them understand where those gaps are. We'll put basically a geographical look at where these resources are and see if there is, a gleaming blob on the map. But from there, we moved into potential solutions, and we talked quite a bit about a model, if you will, and that model was kind of applied in different ways that it could actually be implemented. That model basically came through with having a volunteer group or some subset that would be charged with scheduling rides, and homeless youth would call in, set up a ride for a certain time, for a certain place, certain route, and how that gets implemented could unfold in one of a couple ways. Steve brought up a very, very good suggestion where using some church shuttles or church vans that maybe one church would offer rides one morning, another church another. So that's using some capital that already exists. So it would be a volunteer effort to coordinate it, and then to actually carry out the rides would be using existing resources. That obviously goes back to having a strong collaboration in the community and pulling together those resources to set up a structure of scheduling, essentially. Maybe in an ideal world, there'd be about 10 cars that were donated, and then there would be a mini office that could be run by volunteers where these cars would just be out with drivers running around homeless youth, homeless adults all over the place. I think that's probably the Rolls-Royce version of it all, but there's a whole spectrum there that can be accommodated, but still under the model of somehow scheduling rides through a volunteer network. There were other discussions from discounted bus passes maybe piloting certain routes first before unfolding a large-scale discounted bus program, just to check the utilization of that. And then ride-sharing bulletin board was briefly discussed, and basically off-hour repurposing of agency vehicles, which could be incorporated into the church van concept. So that being said, some of the hurdles that were identified were women with children. How do you bring children in a car without car seats, et cetera, et cetera? So there's definitely a lot of things to look into. As part of the LGR portion of this, like I said, the gaps of the time and the resource location, that will be communicated to the transportation folks. And I think from the rest of these other potential solutions that still have a lot of merit in evolving and developing, there is a group of volunteers that have been identified that will serve this up through, and hopefully it will grow some legs through them. Thanks.